I'm Dr. Beth Myers. I'm a faculty member here at the School of Education at Syracuse University, and I am the Assistant Director of the Center on Disability and Inclusion. Welcome to our webinar today. We're here to talk about redesigning courses based on student interests. I'd like to thank all of you for being here. I'd like to thank the Center on Disability and Inclusion. I would also like to thank our sponsor, Karen Siebold, and the Neurodiversity at SU project. The neurodiversity community at SU in this project is to support autistic and neurodivergent matriculated students at Syracuse University. And this program, supported through a gift from Karen Siebold, who's a graduate of the class of '92, provides greater research opportunities and direct support for degree-seeking autistic students at Syracuse University. Our presenter today, Dr. Ranon Nachman, is an assistant professor in adult and lifelong learning at the University of Arkansas and director of research for the College Autism Network. As an autism, and higher education researcher, Brett is committed to illuminating the unique and holistic experiences that autistic college students face. And we are so lucky to have him here to present with us. A couple of pieces of housekeeping today. I just want to acknowledge that this is a student break at Syracuse University. So we do have some folks who are able to join us today, but we also know that there's some people who are not able to be here. So we're going to be recording this to reach a broader audience, and then we'll have this available for later. Also, if it will be recorded, and you can enable captions on your Zoom screen. So I think that was it for housekeeping. Carly, is there anything I'm forgetting? Okay, Carly told me I'm good. So Brett, you can take it away.
All righty, thank you, Beth and Carly, and thank you all for having me here today. I hope that you feel like this is a good hour use of your fall break, and that you find that this is a useful opportunity for you. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll go ahead and get started. And I invite this to be a conversation. Certainly I'll be communicating a lot, and let's make sure this is turned on. Got it. Perfect. I also have some captions here in case that's useful for folks as well. Hopefully I can communicate with you all for the next hour without my voice going out. I actually was giving a presentation a couple of hours ago, and it's started to lose it about 30 minutes in, but we made it work. Glad to be here. I'm going to share with you an overview of what I envision us communicating about today. I'm going to share with you a little bit about me and my research. We'll briefly touch on universal design for learning. I recognize that's a thread through a lot of your programming. And I really want to elevate the role of classroom actions and conversations and experiences as part of this presentation today, in terms of practical steps you can take in your teaching, and even some transferable skills and lessons to perhaps other roles that you have as it pertains to not only working with autistic and neurodivergent learners, but also all students. And we'll embed some reflections and discussions, Q&A. Feel free to drop those questions and comments in the chat, and we'll create some time to talk about that. I also have my email address on each slide, and I guess that should be it changed to X as opposed to Twitter, but you can follow me there. So who am I? I'm a scholar on issues related to autism in higher education, community college students, transfer, other post-secondary issues. I've been engaging in any or all of these topics for close to a decade now. And I entered this space, the scholarly space, as someone who was a community college student, who transferred, who's autistic, who's embedded a lot of my identities. Also, some, as you can see illustrated by the picture, work on sexuality as well in my scholarship, and often looking at the interconnections across some of these different lenses. And I am now glad to also be able to call myself as a tenure track professor in which I can continue to do the good work and continually learn with and from my colleagues. As mentioned in my intro by Beth, I am the director of Research for College Autism Network, which is a nonprofit where we elevate advocacy, research, and training as it pertains to supporting autistic learners in higher education. We put on an annual conference called the College Autism Summit. It's happening next week, really, in Nashville. It's going to be quite an exciting time. We have 300 people joining us from really all around the world, plus some folks outside the States. And we have a lot of conversations around autism in higher education. As part of this work, we developed a comprehensive database of autism-specific college support programs, which there's more than 100 throughout the United States that are specifically designed to provide mentorship and courses and support groups and other spaces to create community and belonging and resources for autistic and neurodivergent learners. As part of College Autism Network, we also stage monthly webinars where we feature research from scholars all around the world, and we welcome you to reach out to me if you'd like to be added to our listserv and get connected there. So I engage in this work as I'm drawing from personal experience as someone who navigated autism in higher education from a student lens. Now it's from an educator lens. I approach this realizing that really up until 10, 15 years ago, we didn't see very much research on autistic college students in higher education. Similarly, the disability is often absent from a lot of conversations when it comes to focusing on our diverse student body. And I'm glad to hear and see that at Syracuse that there's definitely a big investment in serving neurodivergent learners and disabled students. And I think through these efforts, through webinars, through conversations, we're really elevating the importance of this. We're spreading the word. We're contributing new perspectives, and that's what I try to do in my work. And I wear a variety of different hats as well, outside of professor role, a mentor, collaborator, someone who contributes to our different autism, disability, and higher education communities. I have a fun side. I'm a podcaster. So if you like Disney, there's a good podcast out there for you that I host that focuses on Disney music and books. It's actually quite cool, interviewing composers and authors and the like. And also importantly, I'm a son, partner, a friend, and a colleague. So all these make me who I am. And that brings us to our learning objectives today that entail the following. For one, I would like to encourage you to dismantle any misconceptions that you might have about autistic college students, where we're embracing their strengths, their skills, their differences. This, of course, can be broadened to neurodivergent learners in that we recognize that there's a lot of stigmatization. I recognize you all are here because you're taking the time and effort to further learn. I recognize that we all may have different entry points, and I welcome wherever you might be in that process. I encourage you to identify how to more adeptly teach autistic college students and elevate your college campus's autism acceptance. There's always opportunities for growth. And I also prompt you to pinpoint ways for how you can make assignments and activities more accessible and engaging for all learners to serve their interests. So what I really try to encourage in my work and in my conversations with folks is that there's a lot of transferability. What we may try to accomplish in serving our disabled, autistic learners, folks with other marginalized identities, there are often transferable lessons and takeaways that can serve all of our students. That's something that I think universal design for learning reminds us of, but we can really take that to heart with a variety of different approaches that we take. And you'll note that I often use a lot of identity first language, but recognizing that there's a variety in how folks communicate about disability. And I just generally say honor what the individual prefers. Sometimes it's useful to use broader statements when you're unsure. And I'm going to offer a reflection question for everybody. So let this not be a passive experience. What are your general understandings of autistic college students' experiences? I encourage you to write down your thoughts. If you're comfortable sharing the chat, doesn't have to be anything lengthy, but just indicate what comes to mind when you think about the autistic college student experience. And I'll read a few of those aloud as they emerge in the chat. You're also welcome to turn on your microphone if you'd like to share verbally. All right, we have contribution from Christine, I think. Opportunities. It's a good word. Absolutely. So opportunities that might be available to further their academics or their career intent, or maybe building new relationships. I mean, we can disentangle that in a variety of ways. What are some other thoughts that come to mind? Christina says transformational instead of transactional learning. Oh, I like that. That's much more collaborative in nature, and really thinking of the educational, this post-secondary education as being a really pivotal time in shaping some different pathways. Beth mentions they have a variety of experiences like everyone else, some positive, some negative, right? Yes, absolutely. There's not necessarily a one common model, if you will. Megan says little things are big things. Probably would welcome some further context on that, but I think what I'm perceiving from that is perhaps along the lines of that that certain experiences or situations that may seem insignificant to some folks may actually be a lot more pronounced or salient. Christine, diverse perspectives, everyone's experience of college is different, absolutely. Sarah mentions, I feel like I could serve students better if I knew their diagnoses, and yet I respect sometimes their decision to sometimes not share that info. And yes, disclosure, of course, so many of us recognize that's a very tricky conversation, a tricky topic, because not everybody is comfortable in sharing to everyone. And it may be contextual, it may be based on time, it may be based on self-understanding and self-acceptance, access to diagnoses. Yes, okay, glad I interpreted that right, Megan. Thank you for clarifying. And Brianna says the student's voice is the most important when helping them navigate any situation. Wonderful comments. Thank you for chiming in there. I'm going to offer a few slides related to autism. I recognize for some folks this might be more foundational, but I also want to recognize that some folks might be newer to being in some of these spaces. So when we think about autism, we're thinking of a developmental disability that influences how individuals communicate and process information. It's part of the neurodiversity umbrella and presents differently with each individual. I try to view autism as a continuum and many layered and very multifaceted. I think we can see that also applying to folks who are disabled in other ways. It's not just one description or one box or one thing. And that's where we can appreciate, whoa, I'm just flying through the slides now. We can appreciate the beauty and what each individual brings to their college experience and to life more generally. In the autism community, we see a lot of variability with diagnosis rates. We see that folks with greater social privilege tend to get diagnosed more and earlier than women, than people of color, than low-income individuals. So sometimes we have a distorted narrative of who is in the autism community, and we certainly know that this is not an isolated situation. Autism is often medicalized. Increasingly, we're seeing that more folks are taking a strength-based approach, a social model. Sounds like what you all are engaging in Syracuse is in that mindset, which I think is really important, where we're recognizing the strengths and distinct advantages that neurodivergent people bring. So some takeaways I'd like to offer from my research include the following. I found that faculty are, and perhaps I was a bit too broad with the term generally, but I will say that many faculty, particularly those who are not necessarily engaging in educational efforts around disability, are unaware or unaccepting of many particularities around autism. And that's not necessarily saying that in a harsh or negative way, but think about how we all are as learners. Many of us start off in any space ignorant or unfamiliar. It's only through engagement that our eyes open up and we start to appreciate different perspectives and lenses. I see that increasingly when we're having conversations around autism. I think more folks are familiar now than they were 5-10 years ago, because there's been such an uptick in not only enrollment of autistic college students on our campuses, but also folks having dialogues like this, right? You all creating space today to have a conversation around disability and around universal design, all these important topics. But through further conversation and education, that can go a long way. And faculty and staff, I would say too, we all have such an important role in elevating understanding and inclusion for our disabled students. You all, and just being here today, or those of you joining virtually after the fact, you all are kind of pivotal in spreading the word in your own networks and the spaces that you occupy, so that maybe if there's one or two takeaways you glean from a presentation or conversation like this that you can take with you, and then it becomes like a web that just keeps getting extended. I also hope that you see from today that students seek to showcase their skills and follow their passions, and we have an important job to leverage that as much as possible. But students don't always have the means to demonstrate these skills and strengths and opportunities in college courses based on how they're designed. And that's where we're going to try to think about how we can redesign them. But first, I'd like to offer just a brief reminder about universal design for learning. So developed by CAST in the late 90s, early 2000s, we're seeing this notion of where we're looking at multiple means of engagement, representation, and action and expression, and how we design our courses, how we allow our students to engage with the curriculum and showcase their interests and passions and skills. We're trying to support not only our disabled learners, but all learners. We're wanting them to be the best that they can be. And a few ways in which I would view it is engagement is this tenet where you're recognizing that preferences and motivations for being in a course and engaging with your assignments may vary. So what are a few techniques you can do to really enhance that? You're drawing on formative feedback, where you're continually engaging in this feedback loop with students. You're incorporating a variety of activities, realizing that maybe you're recognizing that maybe not leaning on just one approach is going to be effective, but rather a variety of different skills and conversations and assignments, etc. Scaffolding assignments is really beneficial, where you're creating those building blocks and giving feedback along the way and allowing the students to feel like that they're growing continuously. Representation is that tenet about developing accessible ways for reaching and using information. So I was talking with someone earlier today about how class routines are helpful for not only your autistic learners, but also all learners, because it creates a set of expectations. There can be fluidity, right? You might mix it up in terms of how you may fill a specific period of time, but if you maybe always end the class with a reflection opportunity or start the class with an icebreaker, it creates that flow. It's comforting. Sharing content across various modalities is very helpful. We live in this digital age. Why not leverage it to make sure that information is understood and processed to align with how the person uniquely learns? The last major tenet is about action and expression. You're showcasing knowledge in different ways. That's where, and you'll see this kind of threaded in my next set of points, giving students the opportunity to demonstrate agency in the types of assignments that they can create and complete, so that they feel like they're shaping their course experience. So what you're going to see now is a series of slides that I would call like light bulb moments. These are like little little nuggets of knowledge that you can take with you. Perhaps you implement them in your courses, or you've seen other folks implement them in their work, as ways to redesign your courses to leverage students' interests and their skills, with an understanding that it's not only going to be beneficial for your disabled learners, but also all learners. So let's start off with one. And feel free to chime in the chat or verbally if you have additional thoughts, but we'll allocate some time at the end for more of a conversation as well. So distribute a beginning of semester survey to identify all students' needs, anxieties, concerns, and interests. So what I do at the beginning of all my courses, I started this when I was teaching in my grad school time, and I've continued it, and I know other folks implement this. I was trying to give you show you a visual of a little note card, but like I have some note cards here, and I'll distribute them. I'll put them on the table, on the desks, and I'll say to students, okay, you do not need to fill out any identifiable information if you don't want to, but I want you to share, what are you excited about? What are you interested in? What are your concerns? What are your anxieties? I'll make it pretty straightforward. So like they'll list some details on one side and some details on the other side. They can write their name if they want me to make that association, but they can keep it blank, or they can keep it anonymized rather. And then I curate them at the end of class. And what that enables me to do is I find out what are students interested in, what are some topics I can bring into conversation, but also what should I be mindful of? Like maybe some students get really stressed about a lot of information. So it's a reminder for me to break things into smaller chunks. Others may say, like, I'm concerned about writing a research paper. So maybe that prompts me to further remind them of resources they can consult to assist their writing. Point is, you are knowing from the onset where students are at. You're providing space for them to be vulnerable if they feel so comfortable, but you also are not putting your attention on anybody specifically, because you can then share with the class at a later point, like, okay, here's some general themes I'm noticing that folks are mentioning. So they realize maybe they're not alone in terms of feeling a certain way or having concerns. You also see what those common passions are. Very, very helpful exercise. I also sometimes institute this mid-semester as well to know how we're doing. All right, share priorities associated with each assignment. So sometimes students are like, well, what's the point of this? Why am I even engaging in this task? Is this just another paper? Try to articulate the merit of everything they're engaging in. You know, it could even be just a series of bullet points on the syllabus under each assignment, and sharing what's the rationale behind it. It can be helpful to indicate what the potential time expectation may be, recognizing though that there may be variability depending on how people process information, how long it takes them to write, or if they're crafting a presentation, whatever the case may be. But if you maybe have a sense from past course students in terms of how long something would take, you can draw on that data. You can illustrate how they can demonstrate their passions via the assignment. So that's where it's sometimes good to make something relatively broad. So then, so long as you give some structure and clarity, so they can incorporate their interests as part of that. Also, I co-create my course guidelines to demonstrate shared expectations. So I have my syllabus, I have my expectations. People know what to expect from me. People know that that I like things to be very concrete and transparent, and that I have high expectations in terms of people really drawing on my feedback to deliver the best possible work that they can create. But it would be really one-sided if I just shared what I thought the class should be. So on the first day, I have my physical whiteboard if I'm in a physical classroom, and I'll say, okay, folks, shout out, write out, let me know, what are your expectations for this class? What are your expectations for one another? A few examples of those that have emerged in these conversations include: assume best intentions. I love that one. Be open-minded and ask questions. And what they'll do is, I'll write all these on the whiteboard. and then everybody will sign it. I'll give them a little marker and they'll sign it. So we're signing a contract. And again, I recognize some of you may have instituted some iteration of this in your course, but this also can be an opportunity for students to say, okay, well, I want to make sure we cover this topic at some point in our class. And maybe that's an opportunity to bring in a video on your learning management system or a reading or some other tool. Again, you're allowing students to take agency of their learning. And this is a very accessible way of doing it. If you have a huge lecture hall class, it could be a little bit trickier, but you can still institute this by virtue of maybe, I'm blanking on the name right now, but on Google, where you can create like little note cards, like the sticky notes. I see some head nods, people know what I'm talking about, but there, you can also do anonymous surveys. There's so many different ways in which you can capture that information from students and then make it where, okay, we're all agreeing to this and we're going to check in halfway through and see where we're at. I'll say that that technique is, I typically work with graduate students, but I'll say that undergrads, really, particularly freshmen, really appreciate the chance to feel like that their voice is heard, especially when they're still acclimating. So I think it's actually been very helpful. Jamboard, thank you, Flandre, that's very helpful. Jamboard is really great. That's the tool I was referring to a moment ago. I knew it started with a J, so there you go. All right, here's something else that has its merits, but also is going to be contingent on your capacity and resources and time, quite honestly. Establishing a mandatory office meeting with each student. Some offer it as extra credit, some, of course, have it where it's a course expectation. But these are the moments where you learn about what draws them to take your course, what do they want to pursue. You can draw on your survey findings for context. I find when I chat with my students individually or in small groups, a lot of insights emerge that allow me to figure out how to evolve my courses. And again, it's getting to know folks at a human level. That classes can feel very transactional, very prescriptive, but when you design it in ways where it's more collaborative and where you're demonstrating your own openness to learning about them and what matters to them, that's where the best experiences often are going to unfold. People are invested. So one consideration there. Group projects, oh gosh, group projects, that's kind of a mixed bag, I think. It depends on how much folks actually enjoy offering that, how students feel about collaborating with others. Sometimes they can be super beneficial, other times people will be very frustrated with who they're working with or just the overall setup. So one consideration is develop groups based on a list of shared interests. So that might be where at the beginning of the semester, if you design that pre-semester or beginning of semester survey, where you ask folks what are they most interested in as it pertains to your course, and you compile that. In that case, you'd have to have their names listed. Then you can assemble groups where, again, it's based on shared interests. By the same token, there could also be value in mixing it up if you see some common themes and feeling like that's an opportunity to kind of mix and mingle. Yeah, and I see a comment from Karen about the group projects for their daughter to be really, really difficult. One thing that I really try to promote, because I recognize that what often makes group work really hard is that there's a lack of structure and clarity, and there's so much, like, you have mutual agreement and collaboration. Professors, I think, and faculty educators have a really crucial role to establish structures in terms of what folks' roles are. So if you have a set of positions, if you will, in a group, and having the students determine what role, if you will, they want to take on, that can allow folks to leverage their strengths. So if someone in a group is really organized, maybe they're the ones who make sure that all the files are in the right place, or that everybody is showing up on time, or whatever the case may be. Roles also eliminate or reduce the prominence of confusion or uncertainty in who's handling what. But again, the instructor has to set those norms and set the expectations. I can say from my own personal experience, I often did not like group work because I found myself that it was usually me and or another person who was the uh, de facto leader, because we were organizers. That was just what came naturally for us. I'm not saying that there's a right or wrong, but group work is where often a lot of growth emerges, and classes are relatively safer spaces to orient particularly younger learners to what it's like to collaborate once in the working world. Problem is, though, like I said, educators aren't always positioning students to where they actually know how to make the experience as fruitful as possible. So the structures, the guidance, the rubrics, the very clear expectations that the educator sets, it won't solve all the issues, but it at least provides a foundation. Enrichment clusters can pair students with experts in the field. That might be a situation where it's very much a class to orient students to the profession they're entering. And so there's perhaps a mentorship opportunity there. And as I'm saying with the final point, if you don't know about students' interests, maybe develop an activity where they can kind of find parallels across their interests to serve their projects, right? So if I'm in a biology class, or I don't know, an animal science class, and I'm a student and I'm interested in dinosaurs and want to focus the project on that, and the other student wants to focus on birds, I'm like, well, actually, we can find a huge tie in here because birds are actually connected to dinosaurs, and in terms of just the evolution. So I saw a lecture about dinosaurs last week. It was pretty interesting on my campus, so that's why that's fresh in my mind. But the point is that the instructor can also pop into groups and help foster and find those ways to merge those potentially very variable interests. I think that there's value in assignment choice in terms of what the student completes for their final project. I'm still in my, I'd still say I'm more elementary in this. I haven't incorporated this as much, more so with smaller assignments than the final. However, I think there's a lot of merit in us entertaining how we provide choice in assignments for folks to channel their knowledge and interests, so long as there's still certain expectations met, and that's where rubrics are very informative. But think about how, if you give students, again, here 5 different options of how they might deliver on their final project, and you have your expectations listed, that could be really fruitful. Demonstrate relevance. Case studies are really impactful in helping students see the connections between the topic and how it manifests in real life. So newspaper articles, as an educator, drawing on your past professional scenarios, bringing in even students' personal stories. You want to show meaning. Students are going to deliver stronger work if they feel like this matters. We all know that. And the more opportunities we can create to have those conversations and to feature those tangible examples, all the better. A few more for you. Providing more opportunities for students to drive the curriculum. So here's some that have emerged in conversations with folks, and in the literature, you see that all these examples here are grounded in kind of teaching for the scholarship of teaching and learning, and what educators have implemented. How about having students find an article related to course content that they can share with the class and put on the discussion board? So biology example, again, maybe you have a student who loves bugs and they put in the discussion board a cool Nature article related to entomology, right? Students finding content that interests them that they can share with others that maybe we can all benefit from. Maybe the student is filming themselves discussing what drew them to learn more about a topic. So Flipgrid, some of you may have used that tool, or others, or you're video recording yourself. Again, them bringing their own stories, their own perspectives, their own interests. that informs really viable conversation. As an instructor, you can lead a course activity where you teach the class about a skill associated with a field. So if you're in a business class, maybe demonstrating how negotiation, that just general concept serves business executives. But maybe then having a student share, like maybe some of your students are involved in student life and student run organizations, and they can maybe share about what ways in which they have gleaned takeaways from those experiences that could actually serve the discipline that they're studying. Here's a thought: maybe create a template for an assignment with benchmarks for students to meet via a rubric, but then they fill in the gaps through their ingenuity. So I'm not an architect, but let's pretend we're architects for a second. So let's say you're teaching an architecture course, and maybe this is a more undergrad space, and you basically want students to think about the notion of home design, and you have some expectations in a rubric on some basic benchmarks, basic tenets, but then you give them that freedom. What does it look like? For some, it could be they're designing a 3D rendering of a mid-century American home, and then they're also writing a report of how it would be constructed. So maybe that's complementing someone who loves to write, but also someone who's really savvy with computer animation. Another person might have a filmmaking background and opt to create a 1960s set video featuring a home designer aiming to sell their community format. I mean, I think there has to be some music in the background for it to be completely fitting. But again, filmmaker student or someone who developed student films in high school might love that. Another student might opt to record a podcast explaining how to build a better home. The point is here, you're giving students agency so long as it's still aligned with the expectations of the course that you set in tandem with them. And you have a conversation, right? It's not like you just randomly see on the last day of class, this is what they've delivered. Maybe they'll have, 4 to 6 weeks out from the end of the semester where they're presenting a proposal of what their project could entail, and then you're giving them that formative feedback, or it's scaffolded, right? All these different principles that you can unite so that students can demonstrate their strengths. Now, we're all here because we're interested in neurodiversity and inclusivity. And what I want to articulate is with our neurodivergent learners, with our disabled learners, there's so many different unique ways in which they've processed the world, navigated the world, and sometimes they don't always see themselves represented in the fields that they want to pursue. So this can also be an opportunity for them to find mentors or folks who have a shared affiliation in the field, so that they can recognize that there are other folks like me who have pursued XYZ as a career. I've mentioned scaffolding. I love scaffolding. My students realize that there's a lot of value in that because they're getting that continuous feedback from me. Whether or not they apply it is completely up to them, but I also make it abundantly clear that that's a real high expectation for me, that if I'm investing the time and giving you feedback, I also want to see that you're using that to inform your growth from a paper standpoint. So I'm teaching, graduate level students in education. A lot of our assignments are paper-based, but I also have presentations and other activities too. The point is that this is helpful for the student because it eases their familiarity with content if they're handling something sequentially. And you can gear your comments to how they can explore their interests further. So I'll see that students are interested in something, but perhaps they're looking at it very broadly, and I might provide some recommendations on how they can narrow it. And then that opens up a conversation about, oh yeah, I'm really passionate about this, but I felt like that was too narrow. And I'm like, no, like, explore what's the context there? What have other scholars explored? What gaps are you filling in? Ultimately, it may sound simplistic and straightforward, but you have to make yourself accessible and offer validation. This isn't necessarily a point just about interest. It's just about creating a good classroom, right? Using students' names, giving compliments, showing connections between their ideas and how they can serve the field, focusing on their strengths and their skills, which you will see as the semester evolves. Show that you are open to feedback yourself and that you're making yourself accessible outside of class. So if you want to have a drop in office hours, if you some faculty, particularly in media and business spaces, really leverage social media for conversations to happen there, whatever feels appropriate for you. Some folks really emphasize in their courses how important it is to connect with industry professionals. So I think there's lots of great opportunities to bring in guest speakers, coordinating a shadow day, setting up a mentor match. Obviously, this is more time and effort for the educator, so I do not want to minimize that. However, when students feel like they can see themselves in that line of work, odds are they're going to be more invested. They're going to be more energized. In my classes, so I'm teaching last semester, or this semester too, but teaching EDD doctoral students, bringing in administrators from our community colleges and folks who, are in positions that they'd like to hold, having those conversations, creating those outlets, and you all can determine what's appropriate for your respective fields. It's straightforward, but it aligns, but again, aligning with their interests. Show they don't want to hear you all day. They probably don't want to communicate with each other all day. So find in some other ways to bring in some additional perspectives. So I'm going to take a break from talking for a moment and ask you in the chat or verbally, in what ways could you use any of these strategies or others that served as epiphanies that popped up during this past little bit? In what ways can you use any of these strategies or others in your teaching or your practice more generally at Syracuse? So let's see what some of you think.
Go. I'm a doctoral student, but I also teach and work as a staff member. So in one of the things that's been modeled in my doc classes is the scaffolding of assignments. And I appreciate that just in terms of like a time management perspective as well, to have components and to get feedback from peers and my professor. So trying to model that, like working towards a final presentation that my students have in my class, giving them maybe not like do this part, but like do this reflection that prompts you towards this final presentation is helpful. However, I haven't necessarily articulated that connection super well, as you talked about with the other one of the like why of the assignment and things like that. So sometimes I think being more explicit with our intention for why we're doing things accomplishes a couple of those things.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Bram. And for the record, I'm still very much learning in terms of being more intentional about articulating the necessity of why we're engaging in certain assignments. I think for some folks, it's more straightforward than others. And particularly too, I think intuitively, folks who are further along in their educational career have enough experience, if you will, to demonstrate those connections. But yeah, the scaffolding's really, it can be a game changer. Megan says, I like the idea of the mandatory meeting and can see that helping support advocacy and tailoring the course. Christina mentions, giving options to participate is something I want to be more intentional about when I facilitate workshops. There's also so much value in addressing someone by their name and pronouncing their name correctly. Absolutely. And I am not always the best with that. And I was joking with someone the other day about even how to pronounce my own last name, because a lot will say Nachman, Nachman, not Nachman. So another comment, speaking of pronunciation. So I'm seeing Shasha, I think.
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for confirming. I also think flexibility in terms of course design, for example, co-creating guidelines, multiple ways of demonstrating their learning is a great strategy. Absolutely. That's the beautiful thing about being educators and working in academia. There's so much, I mean, hopefully we're in structures and spaces that allow this, but for iteration where we don't feel completely bounded by just one approach, and that's the end all be all. Lots of great thoughts. Okay, I'm going to wrap up with a couple final slides and then we'll shift over to some questions. So how can the landscape evolve? Going back to the autism piece and disability piece, we recognize that these are identities that are worth embracing, and that it's not just it doesn't our diverse disability identities are often not only relegated to one space or sphere, they often impact a lot of parts of our lives, but they can be very additive and informative. As I communicate about autism, don't view it in just a medicalized lens. It's a social identity, it's an experience. And I think with all of our learners, as we've talked about today, we need to embrace strengths-based approaches. We need to focus on their interests and passions and skills. What can they bring to the table? It's our responsibility to be constantly learning about all of our students' experiences. We don't put that onus on them. We engage in that self-education, as you all are demonstrating today, and where they're not one-time efforts. It's a continued journey. So I certainly encourage you to utilize those strategies. I recognize some of you handle them already so that your courses can be more effective, and be the spokespeople in your respective spaces. Share what you gleaned and help inspire other folks to recognize that little tweaks can make all the difference. And I went to a teaching camp for my university back in August, and I had pretty much assembled my syllabi for the fall. I was pretty much, had everything ready to go. And I realized, what, I can make a few small tweaks. I don't have to change everything at once with my courses, and they're all going to be in this process of iteration. They'll get better with time and experience, and all that to you too. Don't put too much pressure on yourself, but incrementally incorporating changes can serve everybody. So I'll leave it to all of you. I'm not sure how we're doing here with time or other logistics, Beth and Carly, but this would be a great time for questions potentially.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Nachman. This was a terrific presentation. So we have about 10 minutes left. So we can take questions either in the chat or by using the hand raise function. Either way, or even if you just have a comment that you'd like to share, we're happy for some interaction here. Christy.
Hello, thank you so much for this. That was really helpful. I just wanted to reiterate one of the things that you said that I think is really powerful is the idea of iteration and the idea of not attempting to overhaul everything in a given semester. I think taking an assignment and thinking about how do I bring choice into this assignment, and then seeing how that goes before you change another thing for the next semester. I think particularly when I was early in my faculty career, I felt like I had to redo everything all the time. And that is exhausting, but it also doesn't allow us to really understand what worked and what didn't. So I think that idea of iteration and change is also really helpful to sort of recognize that this is a process and that we can continually work at it. No syllabus is ever done, no class is ever finished. So I appreciate that reminder.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Christina.
Hi, thanks, Brett, so much. This was really helpful. A question I have that I think comes up a lot, at least in my, as I'm thinking, with regard to getting buy-in from faculty or other folks who might not necessarily, they might be set in their ways as far as a curriculum or a method. How would you approach getting buy-in and convincing folks that this is not just benefiting those who are neurodiverse, but it can benefit everyone?
Yeah, I think it's an easier said than done type of thing. I try to approach my work with I shared today it was more of a conversation, I think, about practice and teaching techniques. A lot of my research is, some could say, more narrow. I focus on autistic college students primarily and community college students, and some of that may feel really, very narrow and we're like, oh, I don't see the broad application. I'm like, no, it's all about, particularly on the teaching techniques front, and really honoring the notion of universal design for learning as a lens. What we do to potentially support some students could be viable for all. And we're only talking about a few communities here, potentially, but we also don't recognize that there's so many additional layers. So when we're talking about autism or disability, it's not just autism or disability. It could also mean folks from low-income backgrounds or from rural backgrounds or people of color or folks in the queer and trans communities and all these other minoritized communities that are also part of the autism or disability community. So what I try to do in my work is, and in the spaces I occupy and participate in, and I imagine that that many of you are also really committed to teaching and helping folks recognize the value of serving our disabled learners, is that it's so multifaceted, it's so multi-layered, and if we're only and this is where I run into challenges at times too, and in terms of even communicating my work, is it's not just about one singular identity or experience. It's actually everything intermingled. It's not only the identity piece, but it's the social context, it's the resource attainment and what's available. It's where you are geographically in the country. So like in my work, I know in the Northeast, folks who live in New York, New England, there's a lot more autism disability resources on college campuses in terms of specific formal programs than you're going to find in the plains of the US. So what I try to answer your question there a little bit more directly, Christina, I try to talk about the transferability and the versatility of everything, because if I approach my work, or if any of you approach your work with just thinking about the one specific perspective, you're shutting a lot of people out. But it's also contingent on folks who aren't familiar with your work or your lens or your perspectives realizing that that these conversations are a lot broader. So I'm not sure if that fully hits out what you're talking about. It's hard to communicate with folks who are really closed-minded, but I guess what I try to illustrate is asking them questions about what matters to them, and then trying to show maybe where there's that overlap or that mutual understanding.
Thanks.
Thank you. Looks like Bram asks, would you be willing to share out a copy of your slides for further review and reflection? And I know that Carly responded that we will email everyone who registered a full recording of this webinar, so you'll get a full recording. Hopefully that's helpful, Bram. And then Sarah in the chat also asks, I'm curious about the class time itself. I teach stats in our policy master's program and try to have students work on short in-class activities in groups between lecture style teaching. I ask them to gather in groups of 3 to 4 with people around them and work on a few questions on a worksheet. Is there a way you'd recommend doing this to promote inclusion and a better experience for neurodiverse students?
Oh, that's tough, because I know we're communicating earlier about group work and how that can be so hit or miss. So a few thoughts come to mind, but I also welcome other folks to chime in with their thoughts. One idea that comes to mind for me is just prompting folks from the onset so that they have time to process in advance that, okay, we're going to allocate some time today toward this end. I know as someone who's autistic, and not saying that this applies to everybody, but if I'm caught off guard, I'm probably going to be a lot more anxious, and I can put myself in the shoes of of a much younger student, someone earlier in their college career, potentially being very thrown off if they don't have any advance notice to process. I do think setting norms and expectations. Okay, yes, gather in your groups of 3 to 4. We'll set aside 20 minutes. I think someone, have someone in your group serve as a timekeeper, so to make sure that everybody has a chance to participate. Maybe if it's groups of 4, okay, each person has 3 minutes to share their perspectives on something, and then we'll utilize the last 8 minutes for XYZ. I think in terms of processing, there might be value in a writing activity or some sort of self-reflection, particularly if I know reading directions and processing directions can be really hard, particularly if there's a time crunch and with other people. So potentially that could be shared in advance, or to create that cushion, to create that space before the activity for those questions to be addressed, but not everybody's going to be able to think about all that in such a short time period. So additional considerations. Do folks have additional ideas or thoughts toward that end? Looks like Karen adds in the chat, I think it is helpful for the professor to pick the group so that students all get a group without a problem, especially if students don't know others. Yes. My consistent concern is clickiness and how that may manifest. I also try to be very mindful with, if I'm the one orchestrating group selection, that this is something that I implemented back in my grad school time. I still implement it now. I try to be very mindful of folks who identify as women or people of color, that they are not isolated in a group, because I recognize that adds additional challenges, but I recognize that also extends to other social identities that may not be as apparent. That was an additional thought I have, but yeah, that curating can have its pros and cons. Yeah, Beth mentions I have students fill out a Google form that only they can see, that asks them for students that work well with and students they don't work well with, and strengths they bring to the group work. Oh, I love that idea. That's a great idea. I recognize we're at the hour mark, so I'll turn it back over to all of you.
Great. So thanks everyone for attending today. We are at an hour, so you will get a recording of this and we will have that to share out. I'd like to thank Dr. Nachman for his time and expertise today. This was a terrific session. I hope that it was helpful for all of you. I'd like to thank Dr. Ashby, our director of the Center on Disability and Inclusion, Carly Grafassi, who puts so much work into getting all of these pieces together, and to Karen Siebold for her sponsorship of this program. Thank you all for coming today. I appreciate you being here, and I hope that this was a really useful session for you. Enjoy the rest of the day, everyone.